looked at your blog, the Metamagician blog.
Yeah.
And it's got a really long, that really long post, or the one that's got like about 6 million replies to it. I think like a while ago I think you told me about when you had a.
This is about the future of transhumanism.
Yeah,
they're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, some time back now. It might be
Michael and there's
a couple of years ago even. There was a post where I was talking about the history of the history, but actually the future of the transhumanist movement. And I was expressing some ambivalence, as I always do, about the transhumanist movement. Is it something that I would want to dedicate myself to wholeheartedly in the sense of calling myself a transhumanist? Should sensible people like me, I do generally consider myself a sensible person, do we want to be involved in something that has a sort of cultish periphery to it at least? Is it appropriate to apply a term like transhumanist to ourselves? And that term has a lot of baggage. But at the same time, if sensible people desert the transhumanist movement, it leaves it in the hands of not so sensible people. If sensible people refuse to apply the term to themselves, it leaves that term applied only to people who are not so sensible. There's a bit of a dilemma there. So I was raising those sorts of questions in that blog post, having raised them sometime before. I was sort of resurrecting an old post. And a lot of people got involved in the debate. It was a fairly inconclusive debate. I'm still not sure what the answer is. I've raised the dilemma. I still think it is the dilemma for the transhumanist movement and for sensible people within the transhumanist movement. But it's something that people are talking about a lot. It clearly is a dilemma that should worry us if we see any merit at all in the transhumanist movement, as I do.
I think, from my impression, people see the transhumanist movement, or people who are into extreme technology, as generally nerds or Dungeons and Dragons playing
nerds and geeks
freaks, and the people who just immerse themselves in sci-fi and don't have a head in the real world.
Right.
But
so it's a stereotype.
It is a stereotype. But how? I mean, that's fashion because people are used to what they see in the here and now, and maybe people see the year 2009 in 10 years just with a few extra gadgets with flashing lights and maybe a few more controls, but don't see disruptive impact of some newer technologies reaching a certain stage where they can have a massive impact. Yeah.
And we know that technologies do have a massive social impact.
They do. We didn't. Not a lot of people guessed the internet, did they?
No, not a lot of people did. Some people guessed something like it, but not a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And the effect of it has been immense. I mean, the effect of it, comes home to me every day. It's an entirely positive effect from my point of view. Doubtless there is a downside as well, but it's a pervasive effect. Nobody really understood what that would be like. Arthur C. Clarke had some inklings of it way back in about 1960. You could say that Ian Forster had some inklings of it way back early in the 20th century in a very negative sort of way. But basically, it was little understood what would happen. And even in the early 1990s, very few people had any real understanding of it.
We had a few writers, or William Gibson, talking about
before
then Werner Vinge as well.
Yes, so Vinge and Gibson are writing back in the early 80s. Neuromancer, for example, came out in 1984.
Yes, did it?
Yes.
Okay. I thought it was a bit later than that.
No, it was actually 1984. And some other stuff came out a bit earlier as part of that whole cyberpunk movement that got going around about 1980, I suppose. It really started to get going. And you could say that some of that was a precursor of the internet, and of course Gibson coined the term cyberspace and so on. But few people really understood it. Neuromancer to some extent was a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I think a lot of people involved in the internet have tried to make it a bit like Gibson's picture of cyberspace. But certainly the impact of it was not generally understood.
I'm sure. A few company names.
Oh, I'm sure that's right, yes. I'm sure that's right. And of course the term cyberspace itself. So we don't know in advance what effect technologies will have. When the contraceptive pill was invented in the early 1960s, it had a huge social impact, as you and I were talking about earlier on. I would say that few people really understood that that was going to happen in terms of the invention itself, and B, in terms of what the social impact would be. Although, again, Arthur C. Clarke foresaw something like that happening, writing back in the 1950s.
It's not like nobody has any idea of what can happen in the future as a result. But people can guess, but just not a lot of people do.
And lots of people get it wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, Clarke had a pretty good record, but I mean, even Clarke, when he came up with the idea of communication satellites, great credit to Clarke. He came up with that idea, but his concept of how it would work was actually very different from how it actually does work. Yes. So,
was he a technologist, or was he just a science fiction writer?
Oh no, he does have a background in technology and science.
Technology as well. Yes. What do you think of Ray Kurzweil's predictions then?
Oh, look.
Do you know much about that?
Yes, I do. I'm familiar with Ray Kurzweil. I've read most of his work, including the big book, Singularity.
Singularity is near, Spiritual Machines.
Hey, Chris. So we'll start this one again.
That's okay. I'm sure it's fine.
Oh, well. And this side, so I was maundering a bit. Look, I am familiar with Kurzweil. I have read The Singularity is Near, and I've read a lot of his other material as well. I honestly don't know what to make of some of what Kurzweil says. I think there is something in the law of accelerating returns. I think it's clear that the more you know, the more power you gain to find out more. That clearly is right. If you look at the history of humankind over the last, say, 200,000 years, and you look at the history of humankind over, say, the last 400 years, I think you do see the law of accelerating returns in action. Although I also think that Kurzweil fudges a lot of the data when he tries to put this on graphs. Nonetheless, much of what we know, we've only known for the last 400 years. And much of that we've only known for the last 100 years. And much of that we've only known for, say, the last 50 years. Some people say we're slowing down. That's very hard to measure. But certainly there has already been something a bit like a scientific and technological singularity, which began in, say, 1609 when Galileo pointed his telescope to the moon, right? Something like that has actually been happening. The technological singularity that's supposed to happen, of course, like compresses things even more. Compresses things like, in the extreme to a point in time where technological change just accelerates hyperbolically, so that it appears to approach infinity and at least it approaches something beyond which we can't imagine what happens.
Because we're not smart enough.
Well, I mean, it's beyond our comprehension. That may be right. Maybe that's how it'll happen. But I'm a little bit sceptical that it's going to happen that way. I mean, some kinds of change really are slowed down by human timescales. For example, getting change in medicine is slowed down by the fact that it takes a certain amount of time to test medicine on human subjects, right? So it's slowed down by human timescales. And so we're already hitting a limit in how fast we can bring about technological change in the medical area.